Ramachaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjaliana Divaramaya Chata Santita Sata Parajaka Jatika They say to Dhammam Anukampimam Pacham.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Well, I had this idea of doing some reading tonight. There's a phrase that I quite love from a special teacher of mine, Ajahn Anand in Rayong in Thailand, and he refers to cultivating the monastery of the heart. And some of you have been at monasteries from time to time, I know. Maybe some of you are have yet to make that make an acquaintance with a monastery for a few days or whatever. But you probably get the idea of what this means. Some place of quiet and where there's a kind of gentle discipline, which is very much part of the environment, and where things are done with a little more care, maybe a little more slowly. And in all of that, something is instilled in one's experience. I mean, mindfulness is easier, you might say, comes more naturally in that kind of environment. That's always the hope. And we're also being impressed by the actions and demeanor of others around us. So that's very helpful. And then remembering that. So, for instance, I have to travel to Asia in a few days, and so I'll be in planes and airports and seeing people and cars and Bangkok traffic, things like that. And so it's certainly something I'll keep in mind too, or I will try to, just bringing my attention to what Ajahn calls the monastery of the heart. Now, the other side of all of this is that we're in retreat now, and we're meditating as a group, longer hours together. And in the mornings, at least until maybe tomorrow or the day after. But I've been sort of the acting abbot for a couple of months. And one of the things that we've been doing, as we did last year, we read through this book. It's about 800 pages. And, it's like all great things. If you just do a little bit at a time, you get it done. So in the mornings after the breakfast, the lay people come in, join the monastics, and then Lumpur, or in this case myself, will conduct some reading from this. So actually, what I'd like to read, and this is unusual because probably half of my talk will just be me reading, really easy. But what I'm going to be reading is what I read the other day and it just happened to be the thing that I was reading that day, but it was on the day of Lumpur Chah's memorial. So, he was coming to all of our minds a little more acutely at that time. And the actual reading itself, I'll speak about that maybe after I've finished. We're at the early parts of the book here, obviously. It's a mammoth undertaking by a very fine writer, actually, among other things, Ajahn Pavaro. And where the story picks up, I feel like I'm in, what is this? What is it called? Masterpiece Theater or something? where we're picking up the story. This is the story here of Luang Por Chah's early years of monastic life, and he has encountered various monasteries and done various things, and finally he's dedicated himself to being a forest monk because he's been inspired by that. And one way or another, and this would be maybe in his, what would he be now? Perhaps 10th vasa, something like that. He has found himself to Lumpur Anan. So Lumpur means venerable father, Lumpu means venerable grandfather. And Lumpur Man is basically the most important forest monk of the 20th century, highly, highly influential. Just a great monk, fully realized from all accounts, deeply, deeply psychic and very powerful, charismatic in his own quiet way, powerful speaker, and just a teacher of just a magnificent capability and power. His presence was, by many, many accounts, was really awesome. So Ajahn Chah encounters Ajahn Ajahn Mun, and by the way, he and the small group of companions he's with, they spend 2 nights with Luang Por Mun, and for the rest of his life, Luang Por Chah would look at Luang Por Mun as his teacher after 2 nights, 2 Dhamma talks, a couple of questions. But that's how powerful a presence Luang Por Mun had on Ajahn Chah. So now we're picking up the story. He's left after that short stay. He's left Luang Por Mun's monastery. And by the way, Luang Por Mun for 50 straight years never spent 2 rains retreats in the same monastery. He traveled alone and with groups for most of the time for 50 years. He was he's a hardcore forest monk, a Tudong monk, we say, a wandering monk. And then he would find some monastery that was to his liking, typically very quiet, out of the way, and spend a rains there and move on. So he was not easy to find, not easy to track. And this time in Thailand was, there weren't many roads. None of the communication devices that we all assume have been part of human life since medieval times. None of these communication devices existed, and it was a very different world, obviously. And Thailand was an impoverished area, and northern Thailand even more so. So this is where we pick up the story. And this book is sort of divided into neat little headings. So this heading is the kindness of the teacher. So here, Luang Por Chah and a couple of companions now are they're a few days away from Luang Por Mun's monastery. The Buddha taught monks to constantly recollect the fragility of life and the ever-present threat of death, to spend every moment well and take nothing for granted. At night, monks are encouraged to reflect on all the various ways they might die before the following dawn: snake bites, scorpion bites, an awkward fall, appendicitis. The list is soberingly long. Dwelling in tropical forests where their insecurity is palpable and virtually impossible to forget is particularly conducive to this kind of contemplation. One night in the thick forest in Nakhon Phanom, a roving pack of wild dogs caught the scent of Luang Por as he sat meditating in his grot, his bamboo tent, little tent thing, an umbrella tent kind of thing. The motionless form of a cross-legged monk must have been a strange and unsettling sight to them. Within a few moments, Luang Por was jerked from mindfulness of his breath to the awareness of a snarling mass of angry creatures with a mosquito net his only protection. Fear coursed through his body. With a supreme effort, Luang Por steadied his mind, following the ancient tradition he made a solemn resolution. I did not come here to hurt anyone or anything. I came here to practice Dhamma in order to realize liberation from suffering. If I have oppressed any of you in a past life, then kill me so that I may pay off my debt. But if there is no bad blood between us, then please leave me in peace. Lumpur closed his eyes. The wild dog circled his glove, howling fiercely and racing in to lunge towards him from all sides, only to be confused by the thin cotton net that enclosed him. As soon as one of them dared to bite through it and expose the net's flimsiness, Lumpur knew it would be the end, and he became afraid once more. Then suddenly, out of the thick blackness of the night, Lung Pu Man appeared, holding aloft a blazing torch and walking straight towards the wild dogs, halting to the side of Lumpur's squat. He scolded them sharply. Go, leave them alone. He lifted a length of wood as if to strike them, and the wild dogs, stunned and thrown into disarray, ran off. Lumpur, relieved and grateful to Lungpu Man for saving him, opened his eyes to a scene of complete darkness and silence. The next morning, Lumpur set off down the trail with a heightened sense of connection he felt to Lungpu Man. Together with a postulant Gao, his only remaining companion, he was soon to need every ounce of mental strength he possessed to face his most testing examination so far, in the cremation forest. For thousands of years, the Thais have perceived themselves living in a universe inhabited by unseen forces, malevolent and benign. It is unusual to discover a blind belief in the non-existence of ghosts, even amongst the most materialist of modern urban dwellers. Fascination with ghost stories is almost universal. Although secular values have spread relentlessly throughout Thai society, there is no sign of them displacing a deep belief in spirits. Many different kinds of ghosts are spoken of in Thailand. The three kinds that can possess people are particularly feared: Pi Tai Hong, victims of a violent death; Pi Tai Tong Klom, women who died during childbirth; and Pi Po, who, greedy for raw meat and offal, enter people's bodies and chew away voraciously at their intestines. Pi Pret, which is the Pali for Pitta, meanwhile, are the hungry ghosts that are met within Buddhist texts. They are horrifyingly ugly, gaunt and emaciated, with disheveled hair, long necks, sunken cheeks, deep-set eyes. They feed on pus and blood and have huge bellies, as well as tiny mouths, no bigger than the eye of a needle. Their appetite is never satisfied. They dwell in cremation forests and desolate areas and emit long, shrill, and plaintive cries as they approach human beings. In the time and place in which Lumpur grew up, Isan of the 1920s and 30s, fear of ghosts was normal and rational. They were all around. While the modern Western mind is not so terrified of ghosts, it has its own profound fears. In George Orwell's novel 1984, prisoners under interrogation are confronted with the deepest and most visceral of these in the dreaded Room 101. The following passage might be best appreciated if it is considered that the cremation forest was Lumpur's Room 101 and that he entered it of his own accord. So now a lengthy passage when I'm quoting directly from Lumpur Chah. It was late afternoon and I was really afraid. I didn't want to go. I was paralyzed. I told myself to go, but I couldn't. I invited Postulant Gao to accompany me. Go and die there, I told myself. If it's time to die, go and get it over and done with. If it's all such a burden, if you're so stupid, just die. That's the kind of thing I was saying to myself, even though at the time I still really didn't want to go. But I forced myself. If you're going to wait until you're completely ready, you'll never go, I reasoned, and you won't ever tame your mind. In the end, I had to drag myself there. As I got to the edge of the forest, I faltered. I had never stayed in a cremation forest before in my life. Postulant Gao was going to stick close, but I wouldn't have it. I sent him off a good distance away. Actually, I wanted him to stay really close, but I was worried that I'd become dependent on him. I thought that if I had a close friend by, then I wouldn't be afraid. And so I resisted the temptation and sent him away. If I'm so frightened, then tonight let me die. Let's see what happens. I was afraid, but I did it. It's not that I wasn't afraid, but I dared. At the worst, I told myself, all that can happen is that you'll die. Well, as the dusk started to thicken a little, just my luck, they carried a corpse swaying from side to side into the cremation forest. Why should it happen on this very day? As I practiced walking meditation, pacing backwards and forwards, I found that my feet hardly touched the ground. Get out of here, my mind screamed. The villagers invited me to go and chant the funeral verses. I wouldn't have anything to do with it. Get out of here, I was still thinking. But after I'd gone a short distance, I returned. They came and buried the corpse. They bury corpses of people who have died unnaturally, maybe murder or suicide. They came and buried the corpse right by my lot, and then made a sitting platform for me from the bamboo they'd used to carry the body. What should I do now? The village was 2 or 3 kilometers away. This is it for sure. What shall I do? Just get ready to die. Postulant Gao moved closer. I sent him away and told myself, just go ahead and die. Why are you so terrified? Now we're going to have some fun with this. If you don't dare do it, you won't know what it's like. Oh, it was such an intense feeling. It hardly seemed as if my feet were touching the ground. And it was getting darker and darker. Where are you going to go now? Right into the middle of the cremation forest. Die. You're born and then you die. Isn't that the way it goes? I battled with myself like that. After the sun had gone down, I felt I should get into my glot. My legs were refusing to move. My feelings urged me into the glot. I'd been practicing walking meditation in front of it, opposite the grave. As I walked towards the glot, it wasn't so bad, but as soon as I turned towards the grave, I don't know what it was. It was as if there was something pulling at my back. Cold shivers went down my spine. That's what the training is all about. You feel so frightened, your legs refuse to walk, and so you stop. Then, when the fear is gone, you start again. So, as it got dark, I entered my glot, and a wave of relief swept over me. I felt as happy and secure as if the mosquito net were a 7-tiered wall. My alms bowl seemed like an old friend. That's what can happen when you're on your own. You can even see a bowl as your friend. I had no one to rely on, so I felt happy and took comfort in its presence. It's on occasions like this that you really see your mind. I sat in my glot and I watched for malevolent spirits right throughout the night. I never slept a wink. I was afraid but daring to train myself, daring to do it. I sat staring into the darkness the whole night. I wasn't sleepy once. Drowsiness was afraid to show its face as well. I just sat there like that the whole night. In practice, if you're that scared and you just follow your mind, you'll never do it. It's the same with everything. If you don't do it, if you don't practice, you don't get any benefit. I practiced. As the dawn broke, I was overjoyed. I was still alive. I felt so happy. From now on, I just wanted there to be only the day. In my heart, I wanted to kill the night forever. I felt good. I hadn't died after all. After alms round, I ate my meal and started to feel better. The sun came out and I felt warm and at ease. During the day, I had a rest, and by then my mind was getting back to normal. I thought everything was all right. It was only fear. Tonight, I should be able to get down to some meditation practice. I've been through the fear. Tonight should be fine. Late afternoon, and here we go again. They carried in another corpse, an adult. It was even worse than the previous night. They were going to cremate it right in front of my glot. This was much worse. At least the villagers burned the body. But when they invited me to go and contemplate the corpse, I stayed right where I was. Only when all the villagers had gone did I go. They've all gone home and left me alone with a corpse. What shall I do? I don't know what similes I could use to describe to you this fear, and in the nighttime too. The fire had burned right down. The embers were red, green, blue. They sputtered and every now and again broke into flame. I couldn't bring myself to practice walking meditation in front of the fire. As soon as it was completely dark, I got into my glot as I'd done the night before. I sat in that thick forest with the smell of the corpse burning, smoke in my nostrils the whole night. It was worse than the night before. I sat with my back to the fire with no idea of sleeping. How could I sleep? I didn't have the slightest desire to. I was nervous and wide awake the entire night. I was afraid. I didn't know what I could depend on. You're here by yourself and you'll have to rely on yourself. There's nowhere to go. It's pitch black out there. Just sit down and die. Where do you want to go anyway? He's talking to himself again. If you were just to follow what your mind told you, you'd never go to a place like that. Who would willingly put themselves through such torment? Only someone with a firm conviction in the Buddhist teachings of the fruits of practice. It was about 10 o'clock, and I was sitting with my back to the fire. Suddenly I heard a sound from behind me. Tong tang, tong tang. I thought maybe it was the corpse that had rolled over off of the fire and perhaps some jackals had come to fight over it or something. But no, that wasn't it. I just sat listening. Then came the sound, croot crap, like someone moving ponderously through the forest. I tried to dismiss it from my mind. Shortly afterwards, it began to walk towards me. I could hear the sound of someone approaching me from behind. The footfalls were heavy, almost like a water buffalo's, but it wasn't a water buffalo. Fallen leaves thickly covered the forest floor. It was February. I had heard the sound of someone treading on the brittle leaves. Cough, cough. There was a termite mound at the side of my glot. I heard the steps skirting it as they approached. I thought, whatever it's going to do, let it do it, because you're ready to die. What do you think you'd run away to? But in the end, it didn't come towards me. The sound thudded off ahead in the direction of the postulant. After it moved away, there was silence. I don't know what it was. All I was aware of was the fear, and that made me imagine all kinds of things. It must have been about a half an hour later, and I heard the sound of someone walking back from the direction of postulant gal. It was exactly the sound of a human being. It came straight towards the glot as if it was determined to trample over whoever was inside. I just sat there with my eyes closed. I wasn't going to open them for anything. If I was going to die, then let me die right here. Then it reached me. It stopped, stood still and motionless in front of the glot. I felt as if burned hands were clutching in the air in front of me. I was sure the end had come. My whole body was petrified with terror. I forgot Buddho, Dhammo, Sangho, everything. All that existed was a fear. I was as stretched and tight as a monastery drum. All right, you're there, but I'm staying here. My mind was numb. I didn't know if I was sitting or on a seat or floating in the air. I tried to concentrate on the sense of knowing. It's probably like tipping water into a jar. If you keep adding more and more, then eventually it overflows. I was so frightened, and the fear kept increasing until finally it overflowed. There was a release. I asked myself, what are you afraid of? Why are you so terrified? I didn't actually say that. The question arose spontaneously in my mind, and the answer arose in response. I'm afraid of death. That's what it said. So I asked further, where is death? Why are you so much more afraid than any ordinary householder? I kept asking where death was until finally I got the answer. Death lies within us. If that's the case, then where can you run to escape from it? If you run away, it will run with you. If you sit down, it will sit with you. If you get up and walk off, it'll walk with you because death lies within us. There's nowhere to go. Whether you're afraid or not makes no difference. You still have to die. There's no escape. These reflections cut off my thoughts. When this dialogue had come to an end, familiar perceptions returned to the surface of my mind and the fear subsided. The change was as simple and total as when you flip your hand over from its back to the palm. I felt a great amazement that such fearlessness could arise right in the very same place for there had been such a strong fear just a few moments before. My heart soared to the heavens. Without the overcoming of my fear, it started to pour with rain. With the overcoming of my fear, it started to pour with rain. Maybe it was the rain that falls on lotus leaves in the legend, the one that only makes you wet if you let it. I don't know. There was a sound of thunder, of wind and rain, deafeningly loud. It rained so heavily, all my fears of death were forgotten. Trees crashed down, and I was impervious. My robes, every piece of cloth I had, was soaked. I just sat there quite still. Then after a while, I started to weep. It just happened by itself. Tears started to roll down my face. Before that, I'd been thinking how like an orphan I was, sitting there shivering in the middle of a pouring rain. I thought that probably none of the people happily asleep in their houses would imagine that there was a monk sitting out there in the rain all night. They were probably snuggling up in their warm blankets. And here I am, sitting, soaked to the skin. What's it all about? As I started dwelling on those thoughts, a sense of the sorrowfulness of my life arose, and I began to cry. The tears were streaming down. That's all right, it's bad stuff. Let it all run out until there's nothing left. That's what practice is. I don't know how to explain what happened after that. Following my victory, I just sat there and all these things took place in my mind. It would be impossible to describe them all. I came to know and see so many things, too many to relate. It reminded me of the Buddha's words, Pachatang Veditabo Vinuhi, to be seen by each wise person by themselves. That was really true. I was suffering out in the middle of the rain, and who could know how I felt? Nobody, only me. I was so deeply afraid, and then the fear disappeared. The people in their warm, dry houses couldn't know what that was like. Only I could know because it's Pachatan. Who could I tell? Who could I relate it to? The more I reflected on it, the more certain I became, and the more my heart was filled with energy and faith in the teachings. I contemplated the Dhamma until dawn. As it became light, I opened my eyes, and whichever way I looked, the whole world was yellow. The danger had gone. During the night, I'd felt the need to urinate, but I'd been too afraid to get up. I'd held it back, and after some time, the urge passed. In the morning, when I got up, the whole world looked as yellow as the early morning sunlight. I went to urinate, and all that came out was blood. I wondered whether something inside me had torn or broken. I became afraid that something must have ruptured. And then I was confronted by an immediate retort. If it's ruptured, then it's nobody's fault. It's just the way things are. It was an immediate and a spontaneous answer to the worry. If it's ruptured, it's ruptured. If you're going to die, you're going to die. You've been sitting there minding your own business. If it wants to rupture, let it. The mind carried on this dialogue. It was like two people struggling for possession of something, one pulling it one way, the other pulling it back again. One part of my mind elbowed its way in, saying there was a serious problem. Another part fought with it immediately. As I urinated, the blood came out in globs. I started to wonder where I could find some medicine. Don't bother. Where would you go anyway? You're a monk. You can't dig up medicinal roots. If it's time to die, then just die. What can you do about it? Dying while practicing the teachings is noble. You should be satisfied to die. If you're going to die for the sake of something evil, that wouldn't be worth it. But if you die like this, it's fitting. All right, I said to myself, so be it. So that's the end of that, probably taken from a Dhamma talk at some time. That morning, Lumpur went on his alms round, shaking with a fever that he bore patiently for a week before deciding to ask permission to convalesce at a nearby monastery. 10 days later, he had recovered sufficiently to continue his wandering. And I'll leave the story there. So, there's just so much that one could take from a story like that. we're all practitioners. He's a practitioner. We meditate on the Buddhist teachings. We do mindfulness of the breath. He meditated on the Buddhist teachings. He does mindfulness and breath. And yet our worlds are very different. He was doing what came natural to him, given his culture, given the era in which he lived, given the simplicity of his life before he became a monk. It was a big step, but not an enormous step to begin doing what he began to do, which was becoming a very austere forest monk. And then to undergo what he did, as Ajahn says, to confront his room 101, that stems naturally from his life. So there are many things in a story like this which seem to have little bearing on our lives. What it does for me as a monk, but I think it can do for any practitioner. It's a little like, for me, I suspect every one of you have played some sports from time to time. Maybe some of you still play tennis, or maybe when you're a kid. I mean, I certainly played soccer a lot when I was a kid. I was a goalie mostly. And so there's soccer, and some of you probably still ski. And so sports, yeah, they're fun, they're enjoyable, get exercise, and we get out with people and knock a ball around or ski down slopes and that kind of thing. And yet we recognize that none of us maybe could ever have done what we see people doing in the Olympics. Or I think the World Cup is now over, and Messi, his first name I've forgotten, but so there's this great footballer named Messi, who I guess is the champion of the world now with his team. And anyone who's ever played soccer, to whatever degree we did, in all honesty, we can look at someone like Messi and think, holy moly, I sort of recognize, I know what it's like to run down a field, yep, and I know what it's like to kick a ball with my left foot, with my right foot, and maybe knock it towards the goal, and maybe skirt it around somebody, but maybe not do what he did. We have to recognize, and I think some of the appreciation of listening to a story like Lumpur Cha's there is just recognizing that here we've got a high degree of it's a form of skill. He's trained himself in the most rigorous kind of way. He's followed a particular tradition of practice to its utmost, and we see him here in some of his most difficult of circumstances. And yet, this is the life of a practitioner, and yet, if Ajahn Jayasaro is correct, likely we all have our room 101, and some of us may have an inkling as to what that room is. And maybe some of us have never really given that much thought. But I think with some humility and honesty, we can recognize that all of us have probably very profound fears about something, violence, violent death, long sickness, something of this kind. I mean, we can all kind of probably imagine something like this. And what his way of going through this reminds me of is, and I can fill you in a little bit here. When he went to see Lumpur Mun, he had, as I said, he just spent 2 nights with Lumpur Mun. And in the first night, he was asked if he had any questions about his practice, and he said yes. And it was about his approach to Vinaya, the monastic discipline. And Lumpur Mun gave him an extremely concise and beautiful response to allay his worries and indecision about his practice of Vinaya. here too, this is something that can apply to any of us. It was that we look to the two guardians of the world, Hiri and Ottappa. So wise shame, wise fear of consequences, and wise shame. That is just recognizing that certain things that if we were to do them, they would, in any wise person, bring up a sense of shame. That was not well done. That was unkind, or what have you. And so these skillful guardians, these great guardians of the world, keep human beings, to the degree that they acknowledge them, to any degree, they keep the world in some sort of check. And of course, that's why we think about the 5 precepts, or the 8 precepts, or the monastic precepts. We attend to them with as much care as we are mindful of taking. And to that degree, our lives reap the benefit of that. We become, to ourselves and in the experience of others as well, we become to some degree generous and kind. And also, though people don't fear us, they know that we're honest in our dealings, that we won't steal from them. We won't lie to them, and things of this kind, and that brings enormous comfort to people we're around, whether we recognize it on a day-to-day basis or not. It's a great gift to the world. So this is the first night. The second night, he was asked the same thing, and Lumpur Mun gave this extremely subtle and important instruction. He said, there are 2 things. There are the objects of mind, and there is mind. There's consciousness, and there are the objects of consciousness. And they go their own way. Don't get caught up, in other words, in the objects of consciousness and the objects of mind. That's not what you follow. You attend to the knower, we might say. Bring your awareness to that. Sort of strengthen your focus on the actual knowing of what's happening. And it's rather subtle, but that explanation by Lumpur Mun, and given, of course, with the insight that he had, it would have had tremendous impact. And it was given most likely in a very timely way to Lumpur Chah and his very ardent and early days of monastic practice. But it was just the thing he needed to know, and it's something he repeated again and again and again and again. And so when he left the presence of Lumpur Mun, as I've said, he felt that he had the confidence to continue his monastic life right to the end, and see this practice right to the end, to finally unburdening himself of the great torments that come with ignorance and craving. So here we have it. Then we have what at first seems this example of it's like as I said earlier. I mean, everybody likes maybe walking up a mountain trail or something, and maybe even in our youth scrambling a little bit up a bit of scree or something. But would we do the 3-point climbing up some rock face without ropes or something? No, but we might sometimes go on YouTube and watch somebody do that and just marvel at it. But it's not beyond a human being. It's just quite likely it's beyond us now at the age of 40 or 60 or 70 or whatever age we might be. But still, we recognize that's a human being doing that, and it's possible to gain those kinds of skills through developing those muscles, through developing the attention and the various forms of skill required to kick the ball in that way or climb a rock face in that way. It's possible, obviously, because there's that person doing it. So it can be, of course, I would think for any practitioner to read stories of this kind, it is inspiring to see what the utmost kind of dedication can bring to a human life. So it's encouraging, it inspires us, it moves us forward in our own practice. And when we even, at some point, maybe, when we're approaching our own deaths, at some point in this life, and discover, in fact, that there is some fear that resides at the heart of that as we begin to intuit that we're drawing closer to it. We might remember the example that Lumpur Chah offers when he actually consciously undertook to face his deepest fears in the cremation forest. Whatever awakening that we have, whether it's monumental and really major and wonderful, or some just modest insight that we have into our own character and into the fears that have driven us to some degree in our lives. But these things are these accomplishments still are worthy of celebrating, of acknowledging, of celebrating and honoring. And so whatever degree, in other words, of inspiration that we can get from a story in extremis of this kind, it's worth it, because it can encourage us to just continue with our best efforts, wherever our life presently is and wherever our life will lead us. Just to remember that the best of our efforts will lead fine results. So I'll leave those reflections for your consideration.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Nice to see you, Bodhi. Hello. And Brian, I think Brian might be the only, Brian and Nicola maybe I haven't met. I'm not sure, maybe.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to go now, but thank you so much for your teaching.
You're very welcome. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, Anne. You take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn. And we actually did meet when you did a retreat here in Victoria.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
A few years ago.
Oh, good. Yeah, gee, Victoria. Will they ever get back there? Who knows? Yeah. I'm happy if anyone has any questions or.
How long will you be in Thailand for, Ajahn?
Well, I'll be there. Yeah, I guess, maybe 5 weeks in Thailand, and then, 4 weeks in Thailand, a week and a half or 2 weeks in Malaysia, and then just a few days in London. So yeah, gone basically 2 months. Yeah, but it'll be a good, and most of my stay will be in one place, up at Ajahn Achalo's monastery in Khao Kho, Phetchabun province, where I spent about 8 years. And I will, though, attend a 7-day retreat with Ajahn Anan, who's south of Bangkok, a few hours. So yeah, I just feel very fortunate to be able to go and see very dear friends. I have a lot of good friends in Malaysia. Spent quite a bit of time there, been there many times.
May I ask a question?
Here's Stephen. Yes, is there a question? Yes.
From Jean here. What book were you reading
Jean.
from? What book were you reading from?
It's called Stillness. Stillness Flowing. Yeah, it's
I'm working on that.
Are you sorry, Rudy? Are you reading it?
I'm working to it. Yeah, it's a study, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very, very well written. Ajahn Chah finished writing it just a few years ago, and he was originally commissioned to write the biography of Ajahn Chah, which he did in Thai for the funeral of Ajahn Chah. So that was done in a year, a year. And that was many years ago now. And then he was encouraged to write it in English. And he explains this in his foreword. I mean, he put it off for years, and and then he undertook this really monumental work. He's a very, very good writer. Has a very literate turn of phrase, and it's a very kind of thorough work. And it's written for the Western audience, so it talks a lot about Thai Buddhism and the history of Thai Buddhism, and gives you background into the various Nikayas, the kind of monastic traditions in Thailand. And then, obviously in the life of Luang Por Chah himself, the teachings, the particular bent on teachings that Luang Por Chah provides, the Luang Por Chah Sangha, how it developed and spread, the early introduction to Luang Por Chah by Ajahn Sumedho, and how Buddhism spread to the West through this. It's a very thoroughgoing study. You can. I went to Western Canada a few months ago, and I took 6 copies of this. So I was kind of embarrassed at the size of piece of luggage I had to take, but I had 6 copies of it, my luggage. So, and you too can have a copy of this. Many monasteries, the monastery closest to you probably has a bunch that are free of charge to give away. They might appreciate a bit of postage money if you wished to have a copy. The other thing you can do, though, just go on to forsangha.org, I think it is. The main English website, and these things are all downloadable, so you can get the book for free. It can be on your laptop or your tablet in about 3 minutes time. So it's very, very accessible. It's a very handsome volume. It has a lot of nice pictures in it, and yeah, it's I read it myself when I was kind of convalescing at one point a few years ago, and then we read it right through last year, and we're going to read it through again. So yeah, I'm becoming quite familiar with it. Oh, it's called Stillness Flowing. Did I tell you that? The Life and Teachings of Ajahn Chah. And if Ajahn Jayasaro didn't do a single thing more in his life, or if he were to die in some cremation ground tomorrow night, heaven forbid, he would have spent his life, he would have graced us with one of the great gifts of the Dhamma, with that book. So sadhu to him.
Mhm.
Does anyone else have a question?
That was an easy question.
Ajahn, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm new to
I
this
can.
Zoom meetings.
It's
If I
Rudy.
may, I want to pay my respect and Anumodana for the reading and your sharings. And also we wish Ajahn Viratamo well wishes. And yeah, the email I received, thank you. And I'm working on an essay of gratitude to our former teacher as well. It's not easy to do because we couldn't attend any of the cremation funerals because of COVID. And it's the first anniversary at the end of the month. And quite a few of us were affected in the Vancouver area, Calgary, Edmonton, of a very dear teacher, very much like Anagarika Dhammadina as well. She had a profound effect on us. So I took, your essay and tried to reflect on that try to find the words in English language, which is not my first language, and write a reflection and share something that we can do ourselves on the commemoration day on, because it's not convenient to come together, people from Seattle and other places. But anyhow,
Rudy,
I appreciate you share that.
Rudy, who is this teacher you're speaking of?
A Thai lady, and she was, so she met Luang Pu Chah. She, was introducing us to Luang Pu Sumeto. At that time, Ajahn Pavaro was ordained, and he did the translation. He came to Vancouver in '86. And she always had a meditation group here, Sunshine Coast, and amongst other places, and took us there, introduced us to those teachers while they were alive, Luang Pu Buddhadasa, Luang Pu Panyananta, Luang Pu Chah. And unfortunately, it was her time to go. And so I appreciate your thoughts and the reflection you shared. And I just wanted to warm up and see between the lines, sort of, what I want to put on paper and share.
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate to meet people like this, aren't we? To have teachers like this in our lives, and they leave such a legacy. Whether sometimes they don't even know it themselves, because and they certainly can't track the changes their words and example gave, especially after their deaths, of course. But for me, I mean, my life basically is not really conceivable without factoring in Anagarika Dhammadina, for instance. Certainly, I wouldn't know where to begin. What changes would have happened. It's a futile kind of speculation anyway. But there are people like this, of course, and when they have such a benign and lasting impact on a life, this is extremely noteworthy and worthy of honor. So, well done for you, Rudy, for giving that, for recognizing that and putting that attention into the words that you're composing.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for sharing. And what really touched me, being you here, we sort of, you get complacent around the teacher. You get needy, and then you get, you were privileged to be taken along, and she could X-ray you and just pull your thorns out of your heart, and then dropped you. It's up to you now. Goodbye. And I moved on to Calgary, and touched quite a few people there. I was actually amazed on Facebook the amount of feedback and amongst young people, and then she advocated for animals, vegans, and so on. And then I continued right to the end, went down to South America and Ecuador to help the refugees from wherever they came from, Venezuela, and just with their shirts and slippers and employed them, and unfortunately contracted COVID from them too. But anyhow, it was her time, and just stood up for the little guy, for the underdog, for justice, and with a lot of wisdom, and like a lot of the forest monks knew her too. And lucky for us, she introduced us to that, and a very strict way too.
Yeah, good. Well, good luck with that then.
Thank you. Thanks for your support too.
Yes, welcome.
And thank you for Shirley and making me aware that this is on today. And Ajahn, thank you for being part of this Zoom meeting. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Rudy. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, timely. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Maybe I have one more for Ajahn, if I may. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I do volunteer quite a bit in the local communities with the Thai monks. And it's a little bit of a burnout thing here, we had a coming and going here over the last 6 months and post-COVID, and people amongst that were here had to re-establish, and then the dynamics change, monasteries change. And as you know, in the city, it's kind of, a little bit of coming and going anyhow. And I'm, for my part, I don't mind doing that, but sometimes you just reach a limit where you gotta step back and say other people can step up a little bit. How can I avoid?
You have a question? How can you avoid feeling burdened?
Yeah, avoid the burnout, avoid to get to that place where you feel drained and overdoing it.
Well, I guess you have to know your limits and not take on too much. And sometimes, if a person has we all tend to develop identities around being a certain way. I'm a nice guy, or I'm very generous with my time, or very approachable, never say no, that kind of thing. It's quite easy to develop in one sense, a very healthy sense of identity around just being someone that people can rely on. But remember that attaching to identity is attachment, isn't it? So we have to know how to let go. And a group of people, an organization, a monastery, what have you. I remember once Lumpur Pasano, when I was living down at Abhayagiri for a year. I don't remember the context, but at some point he would have been, say, 65 at the time, and someone asked him about retiring, and he said, "Oh, if you think I'm going to be the abbot when I'm 70, you've got another thing coming." And then people, couldn't really imagine Abhayagiri without Lumpur Pasano. And he said, if Abhayagiri can't exist without Ajahn Pasano, Abhayagiri shouldn't. It doesn't have any right, existing. I mean, it has to be able to continue. And there have to be people to pick it up if they value, for instance, if they value what you do, Rudy, and they see what you do, and they see what you do, what you do does for other people. If you can't do it, somebody's got to do it. Otherwise, it won't get done, and things will fall apart. But it can't be up to you. Yeah, you should give what you can, what you feel happy in giving, what gives you something back, just in that sense of satisfaction. But if the only satisfaction you're getting is that you're fulfilling your own identity as being a generous, person that never says no, that won't be fulfilling in a long term for you. The fuel runs out, doesn't it? So
yes, I've been there a few times, unfortunately. Yeah.
Sure. So just you might have to practice how to say no. And think of that as an act of generosity. It lets someone else just step into the position, and maybe learn that they can do these things too. So give yourself a break, and recognize that this great burden of self is a very subtle little problem that we all have to deal with. It's not for nothing that the Buddha spoke about anatta and about craving, and this is where craving gets rather subtle, self-identity, and how it is that our experience of self is a kind of colonization of experience. We're trying to make things that we experience our own, and make ideas that we experience or imagine our own, such as the idea that I'm an indispensable person, as an example. I'm not trying to pick on you here, Rudy, but just, we all face this in one form or another, just the human predicament. So good luck with that.
Well,
Are there any-
Ajahn, go ahead.
Any other questions?
Just gonna say, Jacinta and I would like to wish Ajahn a safe and fruitful journey. It's going to be gone for almost 2 months, and we're going to be sending along our best wishes and loving thoughts and protective energies for a safe trip. And we look forward to communicating with you when you return.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, these things, I certainly gain a lot from being together with people in this, even in this Zoom arena. It's a very nice way to contribute to people. So I appreciate that.
We certainly appreciate it, Ajahn.
It's yeah, you just feel really grateful as a monk to have these things to be able to do and be able to offer some energy to others on the basis of the great privilege I have of living as a monk. So, running out of words.
I feel privileged to know you. It's very good for the heart to see you again. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Bodhi. That's very kind. It's good to see you too. Say hello to Barbara for me.
I will for sure. Yes.
Thank you. I miss it's always funny when you're on. Usually you've got your screen thing on and there's this picture of Barb up some ski hill across the mountain or something.
She's very shy.
Would you like to do one more chant, Ajahn?
All right. Maybe sharing of blessings. Yeah, always remembering, this practice that we do, it maybe seems quite normal and natural and all of that. And it is when it's customary and habitual and we've made good habits and that. But we're making merit doing this. And so when that happens, we have something to give and something to spread. And so we have some energy, some power to spread our own blessings with. It's a really wonderful thing. Okay, now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana. In every kind of birth, may I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge, unsurpasses the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and illusion be dispelled. Very good. Well, nice to see everyone, and best wishes with the rest of your winter. At least I'll miss a good part of it.
Thank you, Ajahn. Thank you again, and we wish you a safe and fruitful time in Asia, as has been wished.
Yes.
Thanks for organizing this to the threesome, Shirley and Connie, Jean. Yeah, very, very good for you to put in this effort for us all. Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Okay, good night then.
Good night, Ajahn.
Bye.
Good night, Ajahn. Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ajahn. Good night,
Okay.
everyone.
Good night, Con. Good night, Susan.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing. Thank
Okay.
you.
You're
Night.
welcome. Thank you for coming, Bodhi. Susan, give Bill our love. And thank you for coming, Rudy.
Good night. Good night, all.
Good night, Jean.
Good
Good night, Rudy.